So if you're not familiar, a chapbook is a book of folded pages. It's actually a bastardization of the word cheap book. So it's quite simple, pretty easy to make, very resourceful. So if you feel like you unexpectedly have some time on your hands, this could be a really great project for you. Um, Despite kind of like the easy nature of a chapbook, I find that actually finding a program or something like that to use it for can be a little difficult. So I kind of came up with my own method, and that's what we're going to be doing today. Um, so there are three components to making a chapbook. We'll talk about two. The first and probably the most important part of it is the actual craft and construction of your work, the poetry, the prose, or whatever it is that you're putting in these books. But secondly, I would say it's the technical construction of the piece, of the chapbook, and then the third is the more physical construction. So we're going to be talking about the second and third. I'll be going into that in just a moment. So the second aspect of making your chapbook is the technical part. I use Google Docs for this. I think though most word processors can do something like this, you might just need to futz around a little bit more with like the settings or whatever, which is really the meat and potatoes of it. So if you're able to use Google Docs, if you already use it, I would really recommend it. It can do a lot of stuff, pretty flexible, and it's free, and that's what I'm using. So the first thing you're going to do is actually get some scrap paper together, and I would recommend getting about like 6 or 8 pages, depending on like how long everything is going to be. So just some scrap paper, and then I would recommend actually folding it up into like a little book. This is just going to be like a rough estimation of what your chapbook's going to look like. I mean, it's just, folded paper. So you get it together, and then you just write on it. So if you can kind of see, I have on here title already, and then I'm going to open it, and I have kind of a code system set up for me. So I have 1A to start with my first piece, and then 1B for the second panel of my first piece. And then I kind of continue throughout. And then when I'm done with that, I actually kind of number it in a different way where I take the physical pages. So this is now page 1 that has both the title and the end, right? And then also on the other side, it has like the beginning poem and another poem on the other. So it's like all a bunch of these little panels that you're gonna have to figure out what the relationship is together. So I really recommend doing this. It just kind of like helps you check your work as you're going, so you avoid printing probably up to 8 million mistakes. So here we are. The first thing you're going to do on Google Docs after you've made your little cheat sheet to the side is go to page setup, and then you're going to go to landscape, and then you're going to change the paper size. It's normally on letter or something. You're going to change it to statement. And then the one thing that I do is I change the margins around a little bit. And this is particular to my style. So if you don't want to do that, you don't need to do that. But these two things you do need to do. So the landscape obviously makes it into a landscape. And then the statement actually tells the computer that your margins are going to be fucked up. So go for those things. Normally there's a 1-inch margin. I cut that in half. I've gone to about a quarter before. You can get pretty flexible with this, just kind of depending on what you want to do. I personally really enjoyed the blank space for these pieces, so I just kept it that way. And then if you're going to keep doing this, I would really recommend maybe thinking about setting this as your default, especially if you don't use Google Docs for anything else. But that's, again, up to you. So back to the document. I'm at about 8 pages right now, and in this I have 4 pieces. I could have fit in another 5th piece, but I chose not to. So here's the first page, right? And this is going to correspond with the little cheat sheet that has the title on it, and then also page 1. So I know on page 1 I have this panel that's just, the left side is blank and the right side is going to be the title because I'm going to fold it. So then on the second page, and I included this little key here to kind of keep up with my cheat sheet, right? It's all about the cheat sheet. So on the second page, I have the first panel of my first poem. And then on the right hand side of that same page, I would have the second panel of my fifth poem, which, as I mentioned before, I chose not to have in this piece, but there's space for it. So if you feel flexible, you can always, futz around with things really nicely in this format. So I have 1A here and then 5B here. Oh, and I'm so sorry. I forgot to mention a very important part of it. In formatting, you need to go into columns and do 2 columns. And that changes everything. Big thing, I just forgot. So then on the third page, you're going to have the first panel of the fifth poem and then the second panel of the second poem. Because again, you're going to be folding it up. And so you're just going to kind of continue, and then it gets a little bit hairy around 3 or 4. You start to see different poems that are spliced together. You can see here I have 2A next to 4B, and then here I have 4A next to, 4A next to 1A. So you can see how it gets really kind of tangled. And that's why I think it's really nice to kind of have multiple forms of what you're doing so that you can conceptualize it in your head, especially like the first 2 times you do this. I think after you do it for a few times, you got it down and it's okay. But the first couple times it can be a huge headache. So I would just really recommend doing that. And then so now for my third piece, which was pretty long, I have the first one here on the 6th page, and then the last one right next to it. And then on the next page, it kind of unfolds, right? And then so on the 8th page, it's gonna be in order. So you have 3C here next to 3D, and that's the last page. And that's gonna correspond to this guy again, because it's gonna be open. So that is the technical aspect of it. It is a little bit hairy, so feel free to just kind of futz around with your own systems. And this system, I will say, it does kind of require a little bit of prior knowledge about how you're going to break up your pieces. So if you're doing this maybe the first couple times, I would recommend doing shorter poems to kind of be nice to yourself. With this one weird piece that I have down here, I have a lot of footnotes into it. The whole piece is basically a footnote. And so that kind of was both a challenge and made things a little bit easier for me because you see we have the different font sizes, but then also I had the numeration there. So, do things for yourself to make it all easier. And that's the technical portion. So once you've gotten all your stuff figured out and printed correctly, you're going to have something that probably looks something like this, with pages, etc., and everything's kind of all loose. What I like to do is probably first and foremost is to really fold the hell out of these guys, so that the pages feel really comfortable kind of moving around, so you don't have any like stiffness or whatever. And for this chapbook, I use just kind of like regular printer paper. But that's just because this is kind of just like a just for me sort of thing. If I was doing something that was maybe a little bit more special or whatever, I would recommend doing some fun paper, especially like for the cover. I think if you got some like cool like tissue paper or something like that, if you have anything kind of lying around the house, like even like newspaper or whatever, I think it could be really cool. But I bring that up because the next part does involve a little bit of sewing. So a thicker paper can hold on to it a little bit better. It would probably maintain a little bit stronger too. So to kind of get started, we're going to have the middle page like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. If you feel like you don't trust your kind of instincts or whatever, then maybe measure it. But I'm just going to eyeball it into the middle of the page, and I'm going to make a little hole, and then I'm going to start to stitch it all together. If you don't really know how to sew, don't worry, because this is like 101 sewing. So all you're going to do is thread the needle, and then just poke it on through, and then poke it on out, and then you do it again. So I would do that maybe like a good like 3 or 4 times, and then you would have it all nice, neat, tightly together. So after you've stitched up your chapbook, you are near completion. I like to do a little cut, make it just a little bit more of an interesting shape personally, but I think that that's kind of an area where you can get really fun. Occasionally, especially if I'm using thicker paper, I actually like to use a knife and wear it on down, and it gives it a really nice texture on the edge. But that's pretty much that. So that's how to make a chapbook. Enjoy.